But do I have to do? Do you have to do anything?
Hello, is it on?
Hello?
Can you hear me? Yeah, I think it works.
Is it on? Is it? No. Is it on? No. Now I was speaking. Yeah. Now I hear. So is that? All right. Let me try again. You try. Is it okay now? Yeah. I can start. Okay. Welcome here on the Solidarity Day today to a discussion and launch I'm very happy to have with Tanzim Wahab of a new initiative that started, I think, being discussed between us 1.5 years back, so definitely before COVID times, on translocal solidarity networks. And what we felt is that there are many socially engaged artists and art institutions who frequently face challenges in terms of the practices of the work environment and the structures they are operating in. And we felt that what could be something to look at is kind of an open network discussion series, something that later transformed into the title Translocal Solidarity Networks, with the aim to look into potential alleys and pathways to create safe and inclusive environments for art practitioners, cultural organizations, but also dwell into policy making, basically. So Translocal Solidarity Networks supposed to form a starting point for collective measures that address concerns of civil society, of cultural organizations around South Asia. So the idea, and you can see the draft logo being displayed here, the idea is to connect, to look beyond our kind of maybe, I mean, every one of you probably, and Chobi Mela certainly, has already a lot of networks, but how can we make use of these networks and transform them or further develop them thematically and in support of art organizations in South Asia? So yeah, we would like to explore this concept of networks a little bit more and solidarity. What does it actually mean? We just had a quick discussion with Shaidul coming in where we talked about earlier initiatives on solidarity. So how can we make this work? What is a network? You have a lot of experiences being a curator, being involved with many institutions in Bangladesh, but also beyond. So what is this idea of network or networks offer us, and how does solidarity came in? Let's hear from you.
Thanks, Karsten. Wow. No, I mean, first of all, this whole initiative is work in progress. And for us, it's really interesting to see, while we call it official opening of an initiative, also the initiative is a continuing process of keep asking ourselves questions and where to start from. That should be the question when we have this kind of initiative. And I think we can start from the title itself. I mean, it has so many important words, and all these words are so much loaded in our everyday practice. We talk a lot about solidarity. So solidarity has its own baggage, has its own promise, a commitment, and we should actually come to a point where there are diverse inputs about the word solidarity itself. But while you already brought in the idea of networks, I can just say what we have at this moment. So many networks, but I would say many of the networks are in fragments, different fragments. For an example, I'm being introduced as a curator. I can see there are lots of curatorial initiatives that are taking place in the last few years. For an example, there are 2 very important curatorial hubs are happening in India, And that actually brought in my curiosity why we have a certain kind of categorical thinking while we also claim ourselves as interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary. Uh, well, I mean, when we call ourselves interdisciplinary, it mostly becomes artistic disciplines. But beyond that, there are so many important initiatives, both in institutional perspective and in freelance capacity, and how do we acknowledge them when we call it network? So while I was having this discussion with Karsten, you can see it's networks, so it's a plural word. So one of the main attempts for us would be to actually problematize the word network, problematize in a way to keep asking ourselves who's included in the network, who's excluded in the network, and how does the network function in the industry in both sense of the economy of it, but also in terms of practice. And then we have found, that the multidisciplinary network, we say, it has lots of extra disciplines. I'm using the word extra discipline. If you see the current situation in Bangladesh or in the subcontinent for the last few years, you'll see a lot of judicial initiatives have taken. For an example, in Bangladesh, Sarah Hossain, Jyotirmoy Borua, very important lawyers who are actually showing solidarity and staying next to the artist all through in a very difficult time. And in India, you'll see the same. There is lawyer collectives, lawyers associations. But while we actually map a certain kind of cultural initiatives, the map doesn't include them. So that's why, I mean, it might sound a bit ambitious, to be very frank, but can we actually have an open, inclusive network, participatory network, more like a hub for people to join in, to claim their own presence, and allow us to acknowledge their presence would be really important. For an example, book initiatives, publishing houses, even the carpenters, if they're engaged with all these big-scale biennales, how we trace them? Where are they in the map? So the first proposition would be actually to talk about the network itself, or to redefine the word networks. But secondly, while you see this map, it's a South Asian map. And I'll be very curious to know from Karsten how she will actually talk about her notion about boundaries. Because it's, by the way, it's South Asia. But at the same time, we're calling it translocal. That means we're not claiming any kind of international network. We're saying there are so many local initiatives. And how do we weave them? How do we connect them? And how it becomes intralocal or translocal. And as far as I really know and appreciate that, your background is about urban studies and urban fringe, I'm very curious to know more about the word fringe though. But while you work on it, then how you connect the map itself? What is border to you when you talk about solidarity?
Yeah, thank you, Tanzim. So yeah, you do see borders in this map, but at the same time we say translocal, so putting emphasis on the local and on connecting the local. And we very clearly do not see this as something where nation states compete or even cities compete, but rather something where different parts of the network kind of are part of overall the same global system, and then influenced artistic practices maybe, but also much more teams, work environments, etc., are not only localized, but a part of this global system, and there's this exchange between, that is not between nation states, but that is within the network between cities, that becomes something translocal, something being made not just in one place, but being influenced by the many places that we have, be it in South Asia or be it around the world. Globally, yes, I do come from an urban studies background. I look particularly into one maybe very interesting avenue that connects to what we are doing here, and that was mobile urbanism. So how do concepts of the urban, of cities, or how cities are becoming, particularly now that we discuss so much about sustainability, how do these concepts travel around the world, and how do they become contextualized locally? And what does it do with a concept that maybe, you know, comes from Singapore and gets implemented elsewhere? So what is the way of landing in a city, and how does the city transform this? And then you're very quickly looking at that, like policies moving around the world being translated into local context, being translated back. You very soon see that the borders that maybe here are still visible, but they're not the borders that you actually that are actually relevant on the policy level. Yeah, so, and that maybe brings me to just make one final point, that we with this networks initiative want to look into a kind of dynamic movement of knowledge production that doesn't start in one place, that starts in many places, and that thematically connects the places with their different languages. We just had this discussion earlier that yes, we do speak English now also. I couldn't do this in Bengali. But at the same time, it's also important to look at how do you translate, not only in terms of the language, also in terms of the mediums that you use, and how does language matter in this, and how do you make sure, you mentioned the carpenters, which I find very interesting in this like translocal knowledge production. Maybe they are not the ones to do this exchange network building in English, but then how do you bridge between Kochi Biennale, Colombo Scope, and Chobi Mela, for example? So very interesting questions.
Yeah, but I'll just come back to this issue about this multilinguistic practice. I think for this edition of Chobi Mela, I can tell you, we have experimented a lot with the format itself, because each festival or Biennale comes with its very established format. Chobi Mela is an international platform, and we used to have all English programs before, but we had opening in Bangla. We have a lot of conversations in Bangla. So it's a mix between Bangla and English. There are some exhibition spaces where we will see Shomari Chakma. She's reading a very important book, Bor Porong, by herself in Chakma language. So bringing in all these languages in exhibition space and panel discussion is also very important politics or standpoint to have. That said, I'll come back to this word of sustainability. I think we keep uttering the word sustainability, but mostly from an institutional point of view, to look into funding, to look into support in terms of resources. But how do we also sustain our emotion? How do we sustain our certain kind of local knowledge when we keep saying translocal and local and local? I think there we need to also redefine ourselves when we see locals. Interestingly speaking, both of these words, sustainability and solidarity, I mean, for me, I try to relate it with ecosystem or ecology personally. I mean, when we see biodiversity, so in biosphere, there are so many different elements, but all these elements are interconnected. And interestingly, when we talk about sustainability, do we recognize or acknowledge those interdependency or interconnected areas? For an example, the way a festival happens, many things are left out. I talked about publishing house, I talked about judicial initiatives, there is this production house. There are also a group of writers, lingual practice, linguistic practice, and in that sense, this time we have brought in poets, writers, critical thinkers who actually express through text in a photo festival. There, I think, I'll just keep repeating one thing and share with you that how much categorical thinking make us actually limited to a certain practice, and why don't we actually realize much more fluid overlap in our practices, and why don't we give them a certain kind of recognition through the practice? Well, I mean, also, you know, I mean, should we talk about the time itself? Because it's pandemic or post-pandemic, we're really confused to title the time itself, and we don't really know when the new normal will come, and was it even normal before or not? Why solidarity network is really important at this stage after experiencing such a difficult time. And I personally feel, I was also affected by COVID and my whole family suffered and survived. I find every single initiative as a generosity, so much generous when people are still delivering, working, coming together, thinking of working in collaboration. Everything is so generously done. But we also need to be critical. And I'm just trying to be self-critical when using the word solidarity. It is always promising when we utter the word, but is there any measurable outcome when we call it solidarity? Should there be any measurable outcome? How can we activate solidarity, considering the time we're going through?
Yeah, I guess it's a question that we can also to some extent take as an open question that we'll hopefully find answers to in the course of the program. However, I think what is very important is what you also earlier said, connecting it to sustainability and looking at shared resources. So art institutions around the world, and that is true for Bangladesh as much as for Germany, throughout the COVID times have been going through very, very difficult times with funding resources maybe no longer being there in that, like in the previous scenario, spaces not being accessible or not being safe to host event in a real space, so having to put everything, Chobi Mela is happening now, but then there's film festivals, there's theater festivals, everything being challenged with having to go online. So, and that has a whole new dimension of required resources to it. So one point I think that we should really also carefully look at in this whole network initiative is sharing resources and what does it actually mean. You brought earlier up this, in our pre-discussion, this issue of friendship and how to transform friendships that you all have in the cultural scenes, how to transform them also into this shared resource use. And I think we also may be much more aware now of putting what is necessary agendas in the art world into policy dialogues. And what you mentioned earlier, like tying up with lawyers, for example, tying up with different support structures, having these thematic discussions. Chobi Mela has an anti-harassment policy published on its webpage pre-event. So tying up on these topics, having these thematic discussions connected with academic research and then taking them further into policy dialogues is, I think, something very important that pre-COVID times equally important, but then I think COVID times has opened new avenues probably to have this translocal connection then. We've been talking about the map repetitively, I think, and this open network ideas. Let's look a bit more into the activities that could potentially come up within this year, but hopefully also a program that can continue for more years to come.
Yeah, in terms of planning activities, it's an ongoing conversation, and we will be very excited and open to get your feedback. So what we are going to do, we'll make a website and launch it very soon. It will be an interactive website where you can actually throw your ideas and also locate yourself in the map. And also, we are thinking if we really need to have policy dialogue, there's a lot of negotiation needed. Just giving you a small example of what's been happening in the continent. Couple of years ago in last Kochi Biennale, when we were present in the opening, Kochi Biennale was very strict about their sexual harassment policy, and one of the founding member of Kochi Biennale, I'm not mentioning his name, but his name is out and people know about it. So he was actually under a trial, and he was taken out from the group of trustees. But while having the opening, many of us found him walking around, communicating with the artists, being present in the gallery, and doing whatever he was supposed to do as an active organizer. And then all the artists and visitors, they actually went outside the Biennale compound, stayed in the street till the night, whole night long. They talked a lot about policies and how we can actually complain, how we can protest. So that gathering was really significant and important for us to see, how much negotiation is needed within a very established platform, and how, while being self-critical, there are so many contradictions on us. We claim a certain kind of position, but we breach it so easily. There is no accountability, and people and the audience, they protest. Well, there was a very interesting conversation came out. People really wanted to have a policy. And then all of a sudden we disappeared. We have our busy schedule and we are like trotting the world for different art events. And it never came. We didn't get the shape of a combined or a certain kind of standardized policy for a safe place. Coming back to this place, I can assure you Weekend Pathshala is very sincerely working on this for a long time, just from the beginning of its initiative. Even Chobi Mela announced its own policy on safe space. But I'm just saying, when we talk about resources and collaboration, I feel we are keep repeating and utilizing our resources without thinking about an efficient system or structure. If we have a standard sexual harassment policy, we should rather make it inclusive, accessible, share it with others so that they don't need to do the head work, they can do something else. So I think this will be also very important a way of designing our activity to maximize our resources, utilize our resources as a gesture of solidarity, that you don't need to repeat the same thing. You share it generously. And this website will be that generous platform where there will be a lot of different kind of manuals. It can be policy manual, it can be guideline, guidance, whatever it is, and it will be completely free for people to work on. So that's one thing, very important, archive, a comprehensive archive which has all these manuals, very useful and functional. One is map, one is this archive. Secondly, we are also thinking we should actually trot in a much more organized way than just being a visitor in the opening. What we can do, if any initiative such as Kochi, as I already mentioned, don't want us to be a partner officially, we can always be a collateral, because there's a space of negotiation. So as a parallel event, we can sit and we can actually keep reminding each other about some of the thematic issues which are always important to remind. So negotiation, that's a very important word. And there are so many friends who are actively involved with all these policy matters, and I keep telling them what makes you distant from offering collaboration or joining in such hub. What they say is also equally very important. They say each initiative has its own politics or political position, which is very important to recognize, to acknowledge, to respect, and to protect. So the word protection is also very important. And then people also fear that if they have a very naive collaboration, just for the sake of resources, just for being together and being out in public as a collaborator, somehow harms their political position or questions their political position. And that's a very important thing for us to consider. But what we are trying to say, how do we have our freedom of our own authorial position, editorial position, or our agenda? How do we protect it? But at the same time, there are some shared common spaces where we need to actually reunite. There we need to have clarity while we offer things. And just to have that clarity, we have to train ourselves first. So we decided we are going to have some closed-door workshops, not between the public, between the institution builders, initiators first, so that those closed workshop helps us to understand where is this negotiation point to have a certain kind of standard space, a shared space which protects our own agenda, but also protects the audience, protects the people, and protects the visitors. So workshop, closed-door workshop. And conversation, that's always there. I'm so bad with timekeeping, you can see. So would you like to talk more about some ideas about the dates? And when do we expect to have the website online?
That's a tricky question. Well, I should say, like, it's a process that starts right now, building it up. You see our draft logo. It's an initiative that is supported by many of the Goethe institutes around South Asia, but then we also see us as exactly like maybe the platform builders, and inviting for a couple of thematic discussions, but never alone. So we're like having you as an advisor to the project, but then kind of the network building is really something that also involves very much the grassroots. So also I think the website can be there, but then the question is, when do we fill in the resources? So closed door discussions, definitely kind of the first step. We'll have research, thematic research papers commissioned towards autumn this year. We would hope to be able to publish these. We are planning a series of webinars on topics such as volatile environments for artists and cultural organizations, how to handle that, on feminist themes, feminism, etc., etc. So kind of a couple of online resources that will be available to the larger network. So again, that has a certain production time. We're identifying people and should have that up, say, starting after Eid and then regularly. And the last one would be kind of this mapping, and everyone who's interested or who's like someone we also feel like we really want them on board to come on board and make the website, make this whole mapping exercise also their own resource in whatever way that is. So we will have an open round of collecting themes on the map, initiatives on the map, and that should start after Chobi Mela.
Okay. So should we take some questions or feedbacks? I mean, with that positive note, you know, we are really hopeful for having this hub. We are calling it more like an open hub, you know, and all of you are actually a part of it. I mean, it sounds very flowery to be and romantic, to be very honest, but what we are trying to say that, you know, there needs to be a certain kind of maximalist approach where, you know, you just gather information in one space without thinking much of a certain kind of quality editing, or, you know, or making a standard of quality, but being really practically in a pragmatic way, inclusive space where actually people are joining in, proposing and critiquing. And we really want to be very self-critical while we practice about it. And there will be loopholes. It's an experimentation. It's a new initiative. It needs to grow on its own, but it needs to be also very self-generative space where, you know, it doesn't forget to have this back and forth of feedback, you know, and it can, if it also becomes a complaint board, it's not bad at all, you know. I mean, that's also important for us to actually give voice to people who are a bit worried about being into a mainstream space and being frank. So questions, suggestion, opinion, feedback? Shahidul.
Thank you for that. I've just asked Amin to project a picture that I've sent him. I think that will be a good starting point for the discussion. Can we have that? Can we see it here? Oh, can we arrange to do that there? Is it possible? Anyway, I can tell you about it.
Can you
while that's
describe the
happening.
picture?
Yeah?
Can you describe the picture a bit?
Yes, that's exactly what I'll do. This is a map of South Asia made by Himal South Asia. And basically what they did is they call it the right side up map. Okay. I'll finish talking, then send it to him. He might get the map a little bit later, perhaps. And essentially you have south up there and north down here. And the way we see maps also directs the hierarchy within which we see things, in terms of North America and Europe being up there, South America, Africa being down below. And I think when we do these things, it is important to recognize what are the givens that we operate under and what are the assumptions that we work under. So I think every now and then, particularly we being visual people, we can turn things around to question the validity of the way things are presented. Because once it is presented in this way, we automatically come up with certain assumptions that go along with this. The other thing I'd like to bring up is a characteristic of networks itself. Networks by nature are lateral. Most structures are hierarchical. And I think when we talk of networks, one of the first things we need to take on board is the fact that we need to reject structures of hierarchy which we are embedded or married to in the first place. And unless we can break those structures, it's very difficult moving laterally because it's not a natural thing. We are trained from youth. We're trained to obey certain things. We're trained to respond to certain things. We're trained to aspire to go up that chain without ever considering that there are very important things on either side which have value. One of the things we did at DRIC very early on is to introduce an email network. At the moment they talk of digital Bangladesh, but in fact we introduced email in the early 90s. And the reason we did it was because we felt we needed to link up with compatriots in Africa, Latin America, and other Asian countries. And we used this very interesting informal network as a way of building resistance, as a way of producing collaborative work, as a way of gaining strength from each other. And I think part of what we can do is to break down existing structures and begin to look differently to new possibilities.
Any other questions we should take before we comment? Maybe not. Thanks, Shaidul, for two. Now we're. Still loading. But I think your description was very clear, and definitely, I just want to put emphasis on your point, because yes, what we reiterate is also something that kind of, there it is. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for bringing this on. Yes, there, to all that we've been discussed and that translocal solidarity networks would be about, there has to be a high degree of criticality and of really interrogating where we come from. Or where we are heading to, and whether what we're doing is inclusive or exclusive, or kind of bringing about new hierarchies. So I think it's a very important point, Shaidul. Thanks for bringing that up again. And we'll look into, in the growing of the network, in the mapping, there should probably be these points in time where we interrogate again and say that, okay, where do we stand, what have we created, and is that actually the path we wanted to go? Yeah.
And also, if you look at the map that we are proposing, it's more like, weaved map and very imperfect. That means we are actually weaving connection in a way, because while we see this kind of map which has so much information, hierarchy is important, and also within the system of a nation, between the cities, how hierarchy works is also very important to address. For an example, we talk a lot about Colombo, and we are so happy that Colombo Scope Art Festival is our cultural partner here, but we don't talk much about Jaffna. It's same here. We are very proud now trying to be self-critical about the festival itself. We are very proud that Chittagong has joined along with Dhaka. It's a new connection, but we don't talk much about Khagrachori. India has a very significant presence in the map of South Asia. We have explored so many places, north and south, but not much of its northeast. And so that's where I think, you know, the map is more like the direction for us to, you know, it's a mirror to us, you know, to look at ourselves and see where are the voids, where are the loopholes and the gaps, and how we actually always take them out from the map while they are present in a geographical map, but in terms of practice, they're always absent.
Any other questions or comments from you as live audience?
হ্যাঁ, বাংলাতে প্রশ্ন করেন। এই টকের জন্য তো তুমি বাংলা শিখে আসছো, সো তুমিও বাংলা বলতে পারো। আসলেই বাংলা বলতে পারে কিন্তু কার্স্টেন। Right.
Okay, if that's not the case, I think we will nonetheless continue the discussion and would love to hear your inputs also, maybe in safer spaces that are even less intimidating, or in the web, if that is more comfortable for all the viewers also who are on the web live stream right now. So I think it's a conversation we just started today. Shahidul, you want to add something before we close?
In fact, I said that শোনা যাচ্ছে? আমার গলা এমনিতেই শোনা যাবে? It's actually based on what you just said. I think it's a question of having a space that is less intimidating. You know, here we try and do something in a little informal way, but what I want to remind everyone here is that this is a building, and a building is bricks and stones and whatever else, but in a sense, what a building represents is the type of minds it draws. Who are the people who will inhabit this building? Who are the people who will exchange ideas in this building? Is what makes the building. Otherwise, one building is no different from any other. And one of the ideas we had with this building, and particularly when you go to the cafe, later on, once the cafe is up, there is a very deliberate idea that this place will be a place where we can have safe discussions. At the moment, we're in a country where there's quite a lot of repression, where there's not a lot of freedom of expression. We are in a space where many people are quiet when they should be speaking out. We hope and expect that this will be a place where you will be able to talk freely without worrying about consequences, and you can begin to exchange ideas that you might not be able to say or talk about elsewhere. So that is a very important characteristic of what we hope this place is going to be. In a sense, it was reflected when we did the first Chobi Mela. That Chobi Mela took place in February 2019, shortly after what was a ridiculous sham of an election. Yet, the first event, if you remember, was a discussion on freedom of thought and expression in South Asia. And we brought together a very fine South Asian panel to be discussing freedom of thought and expression in South Asia at a time when the word freedom itself was almost forbidden. And if we were able to do it then, we can certainly do it now. And whether we can do it or not depends very much on what each of one of us is prepared to do. And this building will remain a building if we don't interact with it. If we give it shape with our ideas, with our vision, with our philosophy, with our hopes, with our dreams, it will become much more than just a building. And that, so Kirsten and Tanzim are sitting over there, they're on a chair, but the point is it is really up to us to shape it and make sure it doesn't retain that hierarchical element and becomes the network that we aspire to.
Thank you, Shaidul, for reminding that very important note. So on that note,
you do sit in the Goethe Institute. I'm not sure you're aware of this. So this space after Chobi Mela is going to convert into parts of the Goethe Institute. And I do see this as a collaborative chance to maybe move out of paths that have long been ventured along and try something new and engage in new discussions. Yeah.
thanks for joining us. So it will be a continuous process, and keep giving us feedback openly, freely. So the next program is at 5 p.m. Between 3 female artists who are participating in this edition of Chobi Mela. This edition has more female participation than any other edition, I can assure you that. And in their solidarity, they will have that conversation about their workspace and experience while working in South Asia. So it will be an online conversation moderated by Sarkar Pratik at 5 p.m. But you can also see it from here. So please join us for the next talk at 5 p.m.
কারো কারো মনে হবে যে আমি বোধহয় ঘুম থেকে উঠেছি একেবারে অনুষ্ঠান শেষ হওয়ার পর কথা বলছি। ভাবছিলাম বলবো কি বলবো না। ছবি মেলা শূন্য উদ্যোগটা দুর্দান্ত, এবং যেই সাহস নিয়ে করা হয়েছে যে প্যান্ডেমিকের মধ্যে আমরা দমে যাব না, আমাদের করতে পারতেই হবে, সেটা লাল সালাম। এবং বিশেষ করে যেই প্রজন্মগত একটা হস্তান্তরের বিষয় এসছে, আপনারা হয়তো অনেকেই জানেন যে এই ছবি মেলায় ফেস্টিভ্যাল ডিরেক্টর শহীদুল আলম না অনেক বছর ধরেই ছিল, এবং একেবারে নতুন প্রজন্ম তাদেরই দিক নির্দেশনা, নেতৃত্ব এবং সকল অর্থেই তাদের ভালোবাসা দিয়ে এই ছবি মেলা অনুষ্ঠিত হয়েছে। আমার দুঃখের জায়গা হচ্ছে যে ঘটনাক্রমে প্যান্ডেমিকের কারণে যেটা হয়েছে, এর আগের ছবি মেলাগুলোতে কিন্তু বাচ্চারা আসতো এবং ছবি মেলা আবার ভ্যানে করে বিভিন্ন জায়গায় যেত। এখন ঘটনাক্রমে হয়তো বা প্যান্ডেমিকের কারণেই সেটা হয়নি। সেটা আমার জন্য মাস্ক পরার মতনই দমবন্ধ। আমি কথাগুলো বলতে চাইনি, বোধহয় সেই কারণেই একদম শেষে হাত তুললাম। এটা আমার একটা বড়সড় দুঃখের জায়গা, এবং দুঃখের জায়গা এই কারণেই বলছি যাতে আগামী ছবি মেলায় কোনোভাবেই এটা না হয়। আমাদের ওই যেই যতটুকু ছবি মেলা রাস্তাঘাটে ছিল, ছবি মেলা অন্যান্য প্রতিষ্ঠানে ছিল, অন্যান্য ধরনের জায়গায় ছিল, বিভিন্ন শ্রেণীর মানুষজন সেখানে আসতো, আসা যাওয়া সেই প্রবাহটা ছিল। এই ছবি মেলা কিন্তু প্যান্ডেমিকের কারণে খুব বিল্ডিং কেন্দ্রিক হয়ে গেছে, এবং আমার মনে হয় আমরা যেরকম মাস্ক পরে সাফোকেটেড হয়ে আছি, এত দুর্দান্ত কাজের মধ্য দিয়েও কিন্তু আমার সেই অনুভূতিটা আছে। সকলকে ধন্যবাদ।
একদম একমত রেনুমার সাথে, এবং এই কারণেই আমরা এটাকে কিন্তু আমাদের রেগুলার এডিশন বলছি না। কারণ রেগুলার এডিশনের আসলে যেই আমাদের একটা ডেমোক্রেটিক স্পেস আছে যেখানে আসলে সবাই ওপেন সাবমিশন করতে পারে, সেটাও গুরুত্বপূর্ণ। দর্শক কারা দেখছে সেটা গুরুত্বপূর্ণ। শহরের সাথে ফেস্টিভ্যালটার কী সম্পর্ক সেটাও খুব গুরুত্বপূর্ণ। এবং এতগুলো সীমাবদ্ধতা মাথায় রেখেই আমরা বলছি এটা একটা বিশেষ সংখ্যা। আমরা আমাদের নিয়মিত সংখ্যা 11তম সংখ্যায় খুব দ্রুত ফেরত যাব, এবং সেই সংখ্যা তার অবস্থানে একেবারে সশরীরে হাজির হয়ে যাবে এবং তার নিজের রাজনীতি নিয়ে হাজির হয়ে যাবে। তবে এই বিশেষ সংখ্যাতে আসলে অনেক কিছু ডিজিটাল, সেটা আমাদের জন্য খুব ইন্টারেস্টিং ভাবতে যে এই ডিজিটাল ইনক্লুশনটাকেও কী করে ডেমোক্রেটাইজ করা যায়, যে মানুষজন অনেক কিছু ডিজিটালি বসে দেখতে পারছে, এবং সব প্রান্তের মানুষ, সব ধরনের মানুষ ডিজিটালি কীভাবে আমাদের সাথে কানেক্টেড হবে, সেটাও কিন্তু একটা নতুন প্রয়াস বা উদ্যোগ। ধন্যবাদ সবাইকে।